They say time heals all wounds, but for the Duke of Ashbourne, time was just a slow-acting poison. 1 year ago, he stood in a crowded room and destroyed the only woman who ever loved him. He thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was powerful. He was wrong. Tonight, the doors to the grand ballroom are about to open, and the girl he cast aside is walking back in. But she isn't looking for forgiveness. She isn't looking for love. She's looking for blood. This isn't just a romance. It's a reckoning. Sit back, because the whispers are about to stop, and the screaming is about to start. The rain in London did not wash things clean. It only made the grime slicker, turning the cobblestones of Mayfair into treacherous black mirrors. For Lady Evelyn Thorne, the chill of the November rain was nothing compared to the ice spreading through her chest. She stood in the library of Ashbourne Manor, her gloved hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the mahogany desk. The room smelled of old leather, pipe tobacco, and the sharp, metallic scent of a heartbreaking. "You cannot mean it," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Sebastian, look at me. Tell me, this is a cruel jest." Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashbourne, did not turn to face her. He stood by the tall, velvet-draped window, staring out into the dark storm. His silhouette was broad and imposing, a figure cut from stone. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of the warmth she had come to rely on for the past 2 years. "It is no jest, Evelyn. It is a decision. The only decision. But yesterday," she choked out, fighting the tears that threatened to humiliate her further. "Yesterday you spoke of our future. You spoke of the spring season, at your estate in Cornwall. You kissed me." "I was mistaken," Sebastian said, his tone flat, lethal in its indifference. He finally turned. His eyes, usually the color of warm amber, were cold and hard. "I have a duty to this dukedom, Evelyn. My family's legacy requires a union of substantial political advantage. You are sweet, but you are the daughter of a country baron with nothing to offer but debt and sentiment." The words struck her like physical blows. Evelyn stepped back, the air leaving her lungs. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the cruelty. This was the man who had held her while she wept over her father's illness. This was the man who had promised her that status meant nothing compared to the connection of souls. "Debt?" she repeated, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "You know my father's debts were incurred trying to save the tenant farmers during the blight. You said that was honorable." "Honor does not pay for the restoration of Ashbourne Abbey," Sebastian said coldly. He walked past her, moving to the liquor cabinet to pour a glass of brandy. "I am announcing my engagement to Lady Clarissa Vane within the week. Her dowry is substantial. Her father's influence in Parliament is necessary." Clarissa Vane. The name tasted like ash. Clarissa was beautiful, yes, but cruel, a woman who delighted in gossip and sharpened her wit on the misfortunes of others. "You don't love her," Evelyn said, a tear finally escaping, tracing a hot path down her pale cheek. Sebastian paused with the glass halfway to his lips. For a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, his hand tightened on the crystal until his knuckles turned white. But when he looked at her, his mask was flawless. "Love is a luxury for poets and fools, Evelyn. I am a duke. I have responsibilities." He took a sip, then set the glass down with a final clink. "You should go. It would be unbecoming for you to be found here when Clarissa arrives." The dismissal was absolute. Evelyn straightened her spine. The naive girl who had walked into this room 5 minutes ago died in that moment. She wiped the tear away with a furious swipe of her thumb. "Very well, Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling not with sorrow, but with the first sparks of a quiet, consuming rage. "I will go. But remember this moment. Remember the ease with which you discarded a heart that beat only for you. Because the next time we meet, I will not be the Baron's daughter begging for scraps of your affection." Sebastian didn't reply. He turned back to the window. Evelyn walked out into the rain. She didn't call for a carriage immediately. She walked until her silk slippers were ruined and her dress was soaked through, letting the freezing water numb the pain. She left London the next morning, and for 1 year, the name Evelyn Thorne vanished from the lips of high society. 1 year later, the crescendo of the orchestra filled the gilded ballroom of the Kensington Palace. It was the height of the season, the most important night of the social calendar, the Royal Winter Ball. Sebastian Blackwood stood near the edge of the dance floor, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand. He looked tired. The past year had aged him. There were silver threads in his dark hair now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. "Sebastian, darling, you're scowling again." A sharp voice purred beside him. Clarissa Vane, now the fiancée of the Duke of Ashbourne, looped her arm through his. She was resplendent in emerald green, dripping with diamonds that had once belonged to Sebastian's grandmother. She was everything a duchess should be, wealthy, connected, and utterly intolerable. "I am merely thinking, Clarissa," Sebastian muttered, resisting the urge to pull his arm away. "Well, stop it. The prince is watching. We must look like the golden couple everyone envies," she hissed, pinching his bicep. "My father says the trade deal with the Americans is hinging on your reputation." Sebastian took a long swallow of champagne. The trade deal, the estate repairs, the endless political maneuvering. He had secured the family legacy, just as he planned. He had saved Ashbourne, but every time he walked into his library, he saw the ghost of a girl in a white dress, crying by his desk. He hadn't slept through the night in 6 months. "Have you heard?" Lord Julian, Sebastian's cousin and only confidant, appeared beside them. Julian looked flushed, his eyes wide. "Heard what?" Clarissa snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "The guest list," Julian said, lowering his voice. "There was a late addition. Someone who just arrived from New York." "Americans?" Clarissa sniffed. "So vulgar." "Not an American," Julian said, looking at Sebastian with a strange intensity. "Sebastian, it's the heiress to the sterling silver fort. The old man, Arthur Sterling, died in Boston 6 months ago. He had no children, only a distant great-niece he had never met until last year. He left her everything, the mines in Nevada, the shipping lines in New York, the banking interests in London. Good for her," Sebastian said disinterestedly. "Why should I care?" "Because," Julian whispered, "Arthur Sterling's great-niece is Evelyn Thorne." The glass in Sebastian's hand slipped. He caught it fumbling, liquid sloshing over his fingers, but he didn't feel the cold wetness. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "That's impossible," Clarissa laughed, though the sound was brittle. "The little mouse? She's probably milking cows in the countryside." At that moment, the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The herald struck his staff against the floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the cavernous hall, silencing the hundreds of guests. "Presenting," the herald's voice boomed, "the Lady Evelyn Thorne, Baroness of Blackwood and proprietor of the Sterling enterprise." A hush fell over the room. It wasn't just a quiet, it was a vacuum. Every eye turned upward. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs. She was not wearing the pale pastels of a debutante. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, so dark it appeared black, dusted with crushed crystals that caught the chandelier light like a star field. The cut was daring off the shoulder, hugging a figure that had filled out, boasting the curves of a woman, not a girl. Her hair, once worn in loose, romantic curls, was pulled back into a sleek, intricate chignon, held in place by sapphires the size of robin's eggs. But it was her face that stopped Sebastian's heart. Gone was the soft, pleading look. Her chin was high, her expression serene and unreadable. She looked down at the sea of faces, the people who had mocked her poverty, the people who had whispered when she fled and she didn't blink. She began to descend the stairs. Click, click, click. Her heels on the marble were the only sound in the room. Sebastian couldn't breathe. He took a step forward, drawn by a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. "She looks," Julian murmured, "dangerous." "She looks ridiculous," Clarissa spat, though her grip on Sebastian's arm tightened painfully. "Who does she think she is?" Evelyn reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look for Sebastian. She didn't look for Clarissa. She walked straight toward the royal box, curtsied deeply to the prince, and then turned. Only then did her eyes scan the room. They swept over the lords and ladies, the gossip-mongers and the hypocrites, and then they locked onto Sebastian. There was no love in those eyes. There was no hate. There was something far worse. Total indifference. The orchestra, sensing the tension was about to snap the very air in the room, hurriedly began a waltz. The crowd exhaled, the murmur of gossip exploding instantly, like a dam breaking. "Did you see the sapphires? The sterling fortune? Is it true? Look at the Duke. He looks as if he's seen a ghost." Sebastian shook off Clarissa's arm. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "To pay my respects," Sebastian said, his voice rough. "You will do no such thing. You are engaged to me. I am the Duke of Ashbourne, Clarissa. I will do as I please." He walked away, leaving her fuming, her face twisting into a mask of jealousy. He moved through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the blue velvet dress. Evelyn was surrounded immediately. Men who had ignored her a year ago were now circling like sharks, drawn by the scent of the sterling money. "Lady Evelyn," Lord Beresford was saying, bowing low. "A pleasure to see you return to our shores. Might I have this dance?" "I am afraid my card is quite empty, Lord Beresford, but my feet are tired from the journey," Evelyn said. Her voice had changed. It was lower, smoother, carrying an accent that was half aristocrat, half American steel. "Evelyn." The name tore from Sebastian's throat before he could stop it. The circle of men fell silent and stepped back. Sebastian Blackwood had a presence that commanded space, even when he was unraveling. Evelyn turned slowly. Up close, she was devastating. The flawlessness of her skin, the dark lashes framing those intelligent eyes. She held a glass of champagne, and her hand was perfectly steady. "Your Grace," she said. "A formal acknowledgement. Nothing more." You are back," Sebastian said. It was a stupid thing to say. The great orator of the House of Lords, reduced to stating the obvious. "I am," she replied coolly. "London has certain charms, and business requires my presence." "Business?" "The Sterling Enterprise has acquired the West India docks." "Sebastian," she said, using his given name with a deliberate lack of intimacy. "I understand your family relies heavily on those docks for your coal exports. I thought it prudent to inspect my investments." The color drained from Sebastian's face. She didn't just inherit money. She had bought the infrastructure his estate depended on. She held his financial throat in her gloved hand. "Evelyn, we need to talk," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "About that night. About why I did what I did." She tilted her head, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Talk? I seem to recall you finding my conversation tedious. Nothing to offer but debt and sentiment. Was it?" "I never said tedious," he protested, stepping closer. "I did it to save the estate, to save the tenants. You must understand duty." "Oh, I understand duty perfectly now," Evelyn said. She took a sip of her champagne. "Duty is what I feel toward my employees. Duty is what I feel toward my ledgers. But you didn't choose duty, Sebastian. You chose fear. You were afraid to struggle, so you sold yourself to the Vane family fortune." "I did not sell myself, didn't you?" She glanced over his shoulder to where Clarissa was glaring at them across the room. "She looks like a very expensive purchase. I hope the receipt is valid." "Dance with me," Sebastian demanded, desperation bleeding into his tone. "One dance. Let me explain without an audience of vultures." Evelyn looked at his outstretched hand, the hand she had once dreamed of holding for the rest of her life. "I don't dance with married men, Your Grace. I am not married yet." "A technicality," she dismissed. "Besides, I have promised the first waltz to someone else." "Who?" Sebastian demanded, jealousy flaring hot and instant in his chest. "Who could you possibly—" "Me," a deep voice rumbled from behind Evelyn. A man stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. He was tall, with shoulders that strained against his tuxedo jacket. He had messy, dark blonde hair, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and a smile that spelled trouble. He looked like a pirate, trying to pass as a gentleman. "Captain James Sterling," the man said, offering his arm to Evelyn. "Her cousin, and the man who runs her fleet." Evelyn took the captain's arm, her fingers resting lightly on his sleeve. She looked back at Sebastian. "Excuse us, Your Grace. The music is starting, and unlike you, James has never dropped me when things became difficult." She swept past him, the blue velvet brushing against his leg like a phantom touch. Sebastian stood frozen in the middle of the floor as Evelyn and the rugged American captain spun into the waltz. As he watched them, a chilling realization settled over the Duke. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had forged her into a weapon, and she was pointing it straight at him. 2 days after the ball, the morning sun over London was pale and watery, offering no warmth. Sebastian sat in the study of Ashbourne Manor, the very room where he had shattered Evelyn's heart a year ago. The room hadn't changed, the leather books, the heavy drapes, the smell of stagnation. But the person sitting across from him had changed entirely. Evelyn sat in the high-backed visitor's chair. She wore a tailored day dress of charcoal grey, severe and sharp, with no lace to soften the edges. She had a ledger open on her lap, and her cousin, Captain James Sterling, stood behind her chair like a sentinel, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries, Your Grace," Evelyn said, not looking up from her papers. "I have reviewed the Ashbourne accounts. They are messy." Sebastian clenched his jaw. "I did not invite you here to critique my bookkeeping, Evelyn. I invited you to discuss the lease on the West India docks, and I am telling you," she looked up, her gaze piercing, "that as the new owner of the docks, I am doubling the tariff on Ashbourne coal exports, effective immediately." Sebastian stood up, slamming his hands on the desk. "You can't. That would bankrupt the estate in 6 months. We are barely recovering from the restoration costs." "That sounds like a personal problem," Evelyn replied calmly. She closed the ledger with a snap. "Business is business. The market rate has fluctuated. I am merely adjusting to it." "You are doing this out of spite," Sebastian accused. "This is revenge for last year." Evelyn stood slowly. She walked to the window, the same window he had stared out of when he dismissed her. "Revenge?" she mused. "If I wanted revenge, Sebastian, I would simply call in the outstanding loans your father took from the Sterling banks in 1890. Did you know about those?" "No? I suspect you didn't. I could foreclose on this manor by noon tomorrow." Sebastian went pale. He looked at James, who offered a grim, unapologetic shrug. "But I am not vindictive," Evelyn continued, turning to face him. "I am pragmatic. I will keep the tariffs at their current rate, and I will extend the grace period on your family's loans. On one condition." "Name it," Sebastian said hoarsely. "I want a seat on the Ashbourne Estate Board. I want oversight on how the money is spent. I want to ensure that my investment is not squandered on lavish parties for your fiancé." Sebastian stared at her. To allow a woman, an outsider, onto the ancestral board was unheard of. It would humiliate him in front of his peers. It would bind them together in a forced marriage of finance. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you want to be tied to me?" "Because I care about the tenants," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, echoing the girl she used to be. "The people you claimed you wanted to save? They are still suffering, Sebastian. While you buy diamonds for Clarissa Vane, the cottages in the lower valley are leaking. I want to fix what you broke." "I am marrying Clarissa for the money to fix them," Sebastian argued, the desperation bleeding through. "And how is that going?" Evelyn challenged, stepping closer. "Has the Vane money started flowing? Or is Lord Vane keeping his purse strings tight until the wedding ring is on her finger?" Sebastian looked away. She had struck the nerve. Lord Vane had promised millions, but so far had only delivered a fraction, keeping Sebastian on a tight leash, forcing him to vote Vane's way in the House of Lords. "You are trapped," Evelyn whispered. She was close enough now that he could smell her perfume, jasmine and rain. "You sold your soul, Sebastian, and you didn't even get a good price." "I had no choice," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "We always have a choice," she said coldly, stepping back. "You have until tomorrow morning to agree to my terms, or I double the tariffs. Come, James." She swept out of the room. James Sterling lingered for a moment, looking Sebastian up and down with a mixture of pity and disdain. "She cried for months, you know," James said, his voice low and rough. "She nearly faded away in New York. I had to pull her back from the edge. If you hurt her again, Duke or not, I will break every bone in your body." James turned and followed his cousin, leaving Sebastian alone in the silence of his accumulated sins. The ultimatum gnawed at Sebastian for hours. He couldn't sleep. The image of Evelyn, so strong, yet so guarded, haunted him. But it was her comment about choice that festered. "You sold your soul, and you didn't even get a good price." He needed to breathe. He needed to see her, away from ledgers and lawyers. It was past midnight when Sebastian arrived at Sterling House in Belgravia. It was improper, bordering on scandalous, but he didn't care. He bribed the footman to let him into the parlour and demanded he fetch Lady Evelyn. She appeared 10 minutes later, wrapped in a silk dressing gown of deep crimson, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked softer like this, less like the titan of industry, and more like the Evelyn he had loved. "You are drunk," she said, clutching the collar of her robe. "I am entirely sober," Sebastian said, pacing the rug, "which makes this harder. Go home, Sebastian. You have your answer regarding the contract. I will not negotiate at midnight." "It's not about the contract," he shouted, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his chest heaving. "It's about the lie. I can't live with the lie anymore, Evelyn. I thought I could. I thought if you hated me, you would be safe. But seeing you, seeing what I've turned you into—" "Safe?" Evelyn frowned, stepping into the room. "What are you talking about? You left me for money. Don't try to rewrite history to make yourself the hero." "It wasn't for the money," Sebastian roared. The truth, held behind a dam of silence for a year, burst forth. "It was never for the money. It was for your father." Evelyn froze. My father is dead. He is dead now." Sebastian said, his voice breaking. But a year ago, he was alive. And he was in trouble, Evelyn. Serious trouble. He walked over to the fireplace, leaning his arm against the mantel, unable to look at her. Your father's debts weren't just from saving tenants, Sebastian confessed quietly. He was desperate. He forged bonds, government bonds. He tried to duplicate treasury signatures to secure loans to feed the village during the blight. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's treason. He would have been hanged. Yes, Sebastian turned to her. And Lord Vane found out. Clarissa's father holds the original forged documents. He came to me the day before I broke off our engagement. He gave me a choice. Marry Clarissa and merge our families, and he would bury the evidence. Or marry you, and he would expose your father to the crown. The room spun around Evelyn. She reached for the back of a sofa to steady herself. He would have been executed, she whispered. And the scandal. It would have destroyed our name. I would have been destitute, an outcast. I couldn't let that happen, Sebastian said, tears standing in his eyes. I knew your father was a good man who made a desperate mistake. I couldn't let you watch him hang, so I made the deal with Vane. But part of the deal was that I had to cut ties with you completely. If I showed any hesitation, Vane threatened to release the documents. So you made me hate you, Evelyn realized, her voice trembling. You broke my heart to save my life. I wanted you to go to America, Sebastian said, taking a step toward her. I wanted you to find someone else, someone free. I didn't know you would come back. I didn't know you would become this. Why didn't you tell me? She cried, tears finally spilling over. I spent a year thinking I wasn't enough, thinking I was worthless. Because if you knew, you would have fought Vane, Sebastian said intensely. You are too brave for your own good, Evelyn. You would have gone to the police, or tried to take the blame yourself. I had to protect you from your own courage. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him. The lines on his face, the exhaustion, the misery. He hadn't been living in luxury. He had been living in a prison of his own making, with Clarissa Vane as the warden. She crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. You idiot, she sobbed, hitting his chest with her fist. You noble, stupid idiot. Sebastian caught her hand. Then, unable to resist any longer, he pulled her into his arms. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was desperate. It was the collision of 2 stars that had been orbiting each other in the dark. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. I love you, he whispered into her neck. I have loved you every second of every day. I love you more than my title, more than this house, more than my life. Evelyn pulled back, framing his face with her hands. We have to break it, she said fiercely. The engagement, the blackmail. We have to end it. We can't, Sebastian said, shaking his head. Vane still has the documents. Even though your father is dead, the scandal would ruin you. It would ruin the sterling company you've built. Let him try, Evelyn said, her eyes hardening with the steel that New York had forged in her. Lord Vane thinks he is playing a game of chess against a duke who follows the rules. He has no idea he is about to play against a woman who has nothing left to lose. She kissed him, then a searing, promising kiss that sealed a new pact between them. Go home, Sebastian, she commanded softly. Play the part of the dutiful fiancé for 1 more week. The Ashbourne annual hunt is this Saturday. Everyone will be there, including Lord Vane. What are you going to do? Sebastian asked, fear and awe mingling in his chest. Evelyn smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. I'm going to go hunting. The morning of the Ashbourne hunt was crisp and cold, the ground covered in a glittering frost. The elite of British society had gathered at the Ashbourne estate, eager for blood sport and gossip. Clarissa Vane sat atop a white mare, looking every bit the future Duchess. She wore a riding habit of crimson velvet, a stark contrast to the dreary landscape. But her mood was foul. She had seen them. 2 nights ago, she had followed Sebastian to Belgravia. She hadn't heard the words, but she had seen the silhouette of the Duke embracing the American heiress through the sheer curtains of Stirling House. She knew she was losing him, and if she lost the Duke, she lost the title she had coveted since she was a girl. You look troubled, daughter, Lord Vane said, riding up beside her. He was a thick-set man with eyes like flint. He is slipping away, Clarissa hissed. He is seeing her again. Lord Vane scoffed. Let him have his mistress. Men always do. As long as the ring is on your finger, who cares where he warms his bed? I care, Clarissa snapped. She isn't just a mistress, father. She is influential. She controls the docks. She has money. If she finds out about the leverage we have, she won't, Vane assured her. Sebastian is too much of a coward to risk her reputation. I want her gone, Clarissa said, staring across the field. Evelyn had just arrived. She was riding a massive black stallion, an untamed beast that looked dangerous. She wore black riding gear, men's breeches instead of a skirt, which caused a ripple of scandalized whispers among the ladies. She looked powerful. She looked like a queen of war. She rides recklessly, Clarissa noted, a dark idea forming in her mind. The fences in the North Woods are treacherous. If a horse were to spook, or if a cinch were to loosen. Lord Vane looked at his daughter. He didn't scold her. He smiled. The groom, Thomas, owes me a favor. I'll have a word with him. The horn blew, and the hunt began. The thunder of hooves tore up the frozen earth. The hounds bayed, streaming into the forest like a river of noise. Sebastian rode near the front, but his eyes kept darting back to Evelyn. She was an excellent rider, handling the massive stallion with ease. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. The plan, whatever it was in motion, but Clarissa was also watching. She lagged behind, watching Evelyn veer toward the North Woods, a difficult path with high stone walls and a steep drop into the ravine. Now, Clarissa whispered to herself. As Evelyn approached the first high jump, her saddle slipped. It was subtle at first, a slight shift to the left. Evelyn frowned, adjusting her weight. She gripped the reins tighter. She spurred the horse toward the stone wall. As the stallion launched into the air, the girth strap partially cut by the bribed groom snapped completely. The saddle slid sideways mid-air. Evelyn was thrown. She didn't scream. She had the presence of mind to kick her feet free of the stirrups, but the momentum was too great. She hit the top of the stone wall hard, tumbling over the other side and down the steep embankment toward the icy creek below. Evelyn! Sebastian had seen it. He screamed her name, a sound of pure agony that cut through the noise of the hunt. He wrenched his horse around, ignoring the hounds, ignoring the protocol. He spurred his mount toward the wall. "Sebastian, stop! It's too dangerous!" Lord Julian shouted from behind him. Sebastian didn't stop. He cleared the wall and skidded down the embankment, jumping off his horse before it had fully halted. Evelyn was lying in the mud near the water. She wasn't moving. "No, no, no," Sebastian chanted, sliding on his knees to reach her. He gathered her into his arms. Her face was pale, a streak of blood running from her temple where she had struck a rock. "Evelyn, wake up. Please, God, wake up." The rest of the hunting party appeared at the top of the ravine. Clarissa looked down, feigning shock, her hand over her mouth. "Is she dead?" Clarissa asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, how tragic. She was always such a careless rider. At those words, Sebastian looked up. The grief in his face vanished, replaced by a fury so ancient, so terrifying, that Clarissa actually took a step back from the edge. Evelyn stirred. She groaned, her hand clutching Sebastian's coat. "I'm alive," she wheezed. "Don't move," Sebastian commanded gently. Then he looked back up at the ridge, locking eyes with Lord Vane and Clarissa. "This was no accident," Sebastian shouted, his voice carrying up the slope. He held up the severed girth strap, which was dangling from the saddle lying nearby. "This strap was cut. I can see the knife marks." The crowd gasped. Murmurs erupted instantly. Attempted murder? At a ducal hunt? Captain James Sterling pushed through the crowd at the top of the ridge. He looked at the strap, then at Clarissa, then at the groom who was trying to sneak away into the woods. James drew a pistol from his coat. "Nobody moves," James roared. "Someone just tried to kill the head of the Sterling family, and I'm going to find out who." The world was a blur of spinning grey sky and biting cold. For Lady Evelyn Thorne, the return to consciousness didn't come all at once. It came in jagged fragments. First, the smell of wet earth and crushed pine needles. Then, the throbbing, sledgehammer ache in her left temple. And finally, the sound, a raw, guttural sound of a man shouting, terrified and furious, his voice cracking against the winter wind. "Back! Get back, all of you!" She blinked, her vision swimming. A face hovered above hers, pale and etched with a kind of agony she had never seen before. "Evelyn, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." It was Sebastian, the Duke of Ashbourne. The man who had broken her heart, the man she had sworn to crush, was currently kneeling in the freezing mud, ruining his bespoke breeches, holding her head as if it were a fragile artifact from a lost civilization. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. She coughed, tasting iron. "I'm still here." Sebastian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Thank God. Don't move. We don't know if anything is broken." Evelyn shifted, testing her limbs. Her shoulder screamed in protest, and her head pounded, but her spine felt intact. She pushed herself up on one elbow, ignoring Sebastian's protests. She needed to see. She needed to know what had happened. The scene around them was chaotic. The hunt had ground to a halt at the bottom of the ravine. Dozens of aristocrats on horseback were gathered in a loose semicircle, their expressions a mixture of horror and titillated curiosity. The steam from the horse's breath rose into the frigid air like fog. At the center of the ridge, looking down with a face of faux concern, was Clarissa Vane. Beside her sat her father, Lord Vane, his eyes hard and calculating. "Is she dead?" Clarissa's voice drifted down, shrill and carrying over the wind. "Oh, how dreadful. I always said that horse was too spirited for a woman of her. Too limited experience." Something inside Sebastian snapped. Evelyn felt his body tense, his muscles coiling like steel cables beneath his coat. He didn't just stand up, he rose like a vengeance spirit. He turned from Evelyn to the ridge, his eyes locking onto Clarissa with a ferocity that made the horses nearby shuffle nervously. This was no accident. Sebastian's voice started low, but it built in volume until it echoed off the stone walls of the ravine. He walked over to where Evelyn's saddle lay in the mud. He ripped the leather girth strap free and held it up to the grey light. "Look!" he roared, thrusting the leather toward the crowd. "Look at the edge. This wasn't wear and tear. This is a clean cut, a knife cut." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Lord Beresford, the master of the hunt, rode closer, squinting at the strap. "By God," he muttered, "the Duke is right. That's been sliced." "Attempted murder," Sebastian said, his voice deadly cold. "On my land, during my hunt." "Don't be ridiculous, Sebastian," Lord Vane called out, though his grip on his reins was white-knuckled. "Accidents happen. Perhaps a groom was careless with a tool. You cannot cast aspersions on my daughter simply because you are hysterical." "Hysterical?" The new voice came from the edge of the woods. Captain James Sterling emerged from the trees, dragging a sobbing figure by the collar of a rough wool coat. It was Thomas, the undergroom who had saddled Evelyn's horse that morning. James Sterling looked terrifying. He had lost his hat, his hair was wild, and he had a pistol in his right hand. He threw Thomas to the ground in front of the Duke. "I found him trying to run toward the access road," James growled, leveling the pistol at the man's head. He had £50 in gold in his pocket. "That's 3 years' wages for a groom." "Tell them, Thomas. Tell them where you got the money." Thomas curled into a ball in the mud, weeping. "I didn't mean for her to die. She said it would just be a tumble, just a scare to send her back to America." "Who?" Sebastian demanded. He stepped forward, grabbing the groom by the lapels and hauling him up. "Who paid you?" Thomas's eyes darted frantically to the ridge. He raised a trembling hand and pointed. "It was her," he wailed. "Lady Clarissa. She gave me the coin behind the stables. She said the American woman was a fraud. She said she was stealing the Duke." The silence that fell over the ravine was absolute. It was the silence of a death sentence. Every head turned toward Clarissa Vane. Clarissa's face crumbled. The mask of the perfect debutante slipped, revealing the terrified, vicious child underneath. "He's lying. He's a thief and a liar. Daddy, do something." Lord Vane looked at his daughter, then at the furious crowd. He saw the judgment in their eyes. The social execution was already happening. He realized, with a sinking heart, that the marriage to the Duke was gone. The title was gone. But Lord Vane was a survivor, and like a cornered rat, he was most dangerous when he had no way out. "Enough!" Vane shouted. He spurred his horse down the embankment, not caring about the danger, pulling up short in front of Sebastian. "You want to talk about crimes, Ashbourne?" Vane sneered, his voice low enough that only Sebastian, Evelyn, and the immediate circle could hear. "You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about the Baron Evelyn Thorne." Sebastian froze. The rage on his face was replaced by a flicker of genuine fear, not for himself, but for Evelyn. "Don't," Sebastian warned. "If you say another word, Vane, I will kill you where you stand." "Go ahead," Vane laughed, though it sounded manic. He reached into his saddlebag. "But the truth comes out either way. I have the documents, Sebastian, the forged treasury bonds, the evidence that Evelyn Thorne's father was a traitor to the crown and a thief who stole thousands from the government." Evelyn, who had been supported by James, pushed herself away from her cousin. She stood on her own, swaying slightly, mud caking her riding habit. "What is he talking about?" James whispered to her. "The reason," Evelyn murmured, her eyes fixed on Sebastian's back. The reason Sebastian left me. Vane held up a thick leather envelope. If you arrest my daughter, Vane hissed, I release this to the press. I release it to the authorities. Your precious Evelyn will be the daughter of a felon. Her assets will be seized. The Sterling Company will be investigated. She will be ruined, utterly and completely. It was the checkmate Vane had held over Sebastian's head for a year. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Sebastian looked at the envelope. He looked at Clarissa, who was weeping with ugly, gasping sobs. Then he turned to Evelyn. He walked over to her, ignoring Vane entirely. He took her muddy hands in his. I tried to stop this, Sebastian said softly, his voice breaking. I gave up my happiness to stop this, but I cannot let them hurt you physically. I won't trade your life for your reputation, Evelyn. I won't do it. He turned back to Vane, his jaw set. Release them, Sebastian said. Publish it all. Destroy my name along with hers, because I knew about it and said nothing. But Clarissa goes to prison for attempted murder. That is the trade. Vane blinked. He hadn't expected the Duke to call the bluff. You would destroy your own dukedom? For her? I would burn the world for her, Sebastian said simply. Evelyn felt a tear track through the mud on her cheek. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He loved her. He truly, madly, desperately loved her. He was willing to become a pariah just to see justice done for her fall. But Evelyn Thorne was no longer the damsel who needed saving. She was the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, and she had brought her own ammunition. Wait, Evelyn said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a razor. She limped forward, moving past Sebastian. She stopped directly in front of Lord Vane's horse. She looked up at him, her eyes hard and bright as diamonds. You seem to be under a misapprehension, Lord Vane, she said. You think you are negotiating with the Duke. But the Duke didn't buy your debt. I did. Vane frowned, confused. What are you babbling about? Evelyn reached into the interior pocket of her riding coat. Her fingers brushed the bruise on her temple, but she didn't flinch. She pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled telegram. The Bank of Liverpool, Evelyn stated clearly. You have 3 mortgages on your primary estate, 2 on your London townhouse, and a significant line of credit for your shipping interests, all held by the Bank of Liverpool. Vane's face went grey. So? Banks hold mortgages. It is standard business. It was, Evelyn corrected, until this morning. At 9 a.m., Sterling Enterprises finalized the acquisition of the Bank of Liverpool. I am now the majority shareholder. I am your creditor, Lord Vane. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. To buy a bank was a move of aggressive, modern capitalism that the old aristocracy barely understood. I have reviewed your accounts, Evelyn continued, her voice turning forensic. You are overextended. You have missed 2 payments on the townhouse. Under the terms of the Loan Clause 14, Section B, the creditor has the right to call in the full value of the loan immediately if the borrower's solvency is in question. She stepped closer, patting the nose of Vane's horse. And considering your daughter just tried to murder a peer of the realm, Evelyn smiled, cold and sharp. I would say your solvency is very much in question. Vane stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The leather envelope in his hand lowered. If you release those documents about my father, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, I will foreclose on you by sunset. I will seize your estate. I will seize your townhouse. I will seize the very horse you are sitting on. You will be homeless, destitute, and facing a scandal far worse than a forged bond from a dead man. You wouldn't dare, Vane whispered. Try me, Evelyn said. I am not the soft-hearted girl you bullied a year ago. I am a Sterling. I eat men like you for breakfast in New York. Drop the envelope, or I ruin you. Right here, right now. The wind howled through the ravine. Every eye was on Vane. He looked at the steely determination in Evelyn's face. He looked at the gun in James Sterling's hand. He looked at the Duke, who was watching Evelyn with a mixture of shock and overwhelming pride. Vane knew he was beaten. His hand shook. He let go of the leather envelope. It fell, tumbling through the air, and landed with a wet thud in the mud between Evelyn's boots. Take your daughter, Evelyn commanded, pointing up the ravine. And go. If I see either of you in London again, I will have James finish what he started. Lord Vane didn't speak. He was a broken man. He turned his horse violently, grabbed the reins of Clarissa's mare, and dragged his weeping daughter away from the scene. They rode up the embankment and disappeared into the trees, leaving behind their dignity, their social standing, and their threat. The sound of their retreat faded. Sebastian walked forward. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the groom still cowering in the mud. He looked only at the leather envelope. He bent down and picked it up. The mud slicked the expensive leather. He didn't open it. He didn't check the contents. He walked over to where the gamekeepers had built a small fire to warm the riders during the break. With a deliberate motion, Sebastian tossed the envelope into the heart of the flames. The leather curled and hissed. The papers inside the evidence of a father's desperate crime. The weapon that had separated two lovers for a year caught fire. They turned black, then orange, then crumbled into ash. "It's over," Sebastian said. He turned to Evelyn. The adrenaline was fading now, and Evelyn felt the pain rushing back. Her knees buckled. Sebastian was there instantly. He caught her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. The contact was electric, a grounding force in a world that had been spinning out of control. "You bought a bank?" Sebastian asked, his voice thick with emotion, staring down at her muddy face. "I didn't like his tone," Evelyn whispered, a weak smile touching her lips. "I thought it was a sound investment." "You are." Sebastian shook his head, searching for the word. "You are the most terrifying, magnificent creature I have ever known." "And you," Evelyn countered, reaching up to touch his face, her thumb brushing away a speck of dirt on his cheek, "are a fool. You should have told me. You should have trusted me to handle the truth." "I was afraid," Sebastian admitted. "I was afraid of losing you to the scandal. I didn't realize I was losing you to the silence." He looked around. The crowd was still watching. The Duke of Bedford, Lady Darlington, the cream of society. They were watching the Duke of Ashbourne, holding a muddy, bleeding American heiress, like she was the most precious thing on earth. Sebastian didn't care. He dropped to one knee. The gasp from the crowd was audible this time. Dukes did not kneel, not in the mud, not in public. "Sebastian, get up," Evelyn hissed, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "You're ruining your coat." "I don't care about the coat," Sebastian said. His golden eyes were locked on hers, intense and stripped of all pretense. "I have no ring, Evelyn. I have no prepared speech. I only have the truth." He took her hand, pressing his lips to her muddy knuckles. "For the last year, I have been a ghost in my own house. I have walked through days that meant nothing without you. I tried to do my duty, but my duty is nothing if I don't have my heart. And my heart is yours. It has always been yours. Sebastian, I love you," he said, loud enough for the wind to carry it to every witness on the ridge. "I love your strength. I love your stubbornness. I love that you bought a bank to save us. Evelyn Thorne, will you marry me? Will you take this broken, foolish man and build a life with him?" Evelyn looked down at him. She looked at James, who was grinning and giving her a thumbs up with the hand that wasn't holding a gun. She looked at the sky, which was finally beginning to break, a ray of pale sunlight piercing the grey. "You're asking for a merger," she teased, though tears were spilling freely now. "I'm asking for a partnership," Sebastian corrected. "Forever." "Well," Evelyn sniffed, wiping her eyes. "I suppose I can't let my investment in the coal tariffs go to waste." "Yes, yes, Sebastian. I will marry you." Sebastian didn't wait. He surged up, grabbing her face in his hands, and kissed her. It wasn't a polite, society kiss. It was deep, desperate, and consuming. It tasted of salt and rain and victory. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through hell to find each other again. Around them, the shocked silence broke. James Sterling let out a whoop of joy. Lord Beresford started clapping, and slowly the rest of the hunt joined in. But Sebastian and Evelyn didn't hear them. They were in their own world. An empire of two. 6 months later, the spring sunshine in Cornwall was warm, a stark contrast to the winter chill of London. Evelyn stood on the balcony of the restored Ashbourne seaside estate, looking out over the cliffs. The renovations were complete, paid for not by dowries, but by the profits of a joint venture between the Ashbourne Coal Company and Sterling Shipping. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sebastian stepped out onto the balcony. He looked younger, the lines of stress erased from his face. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I was just thinking," Evelyn said, leaning back into him, "about Lord Vane. I heard he's living in a small flat in Brussels now." "He is," Sebastian confirmed. "And Clarissa is reportedly looking for a husband in the French countryside, far away from us." "Good," Evelyn sickhead. She turned in his arms. "And I was thinking about us, about how far we've come. We have a long way to go." Sebastian smiled, tracing the line of her jaw. But I have a surprise for you. Oh? Did you buy another bank? No, he laughed. But I did find this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside sat a ring, not a traditional diamond, but a massive, deep blue sapphire, surrounded by smaller diamonds. It matches the dress you wore the night you walked back into my life, Sebastian whispered. The night I realized I was looking at a queen. Evelyn took a breath. It's beautiful. It's yours, he said, slipping it onto her finger. Just like everything I have. My title, my home, my heart. Evelyn looked at the ring, flashing in the sun. Then she looked up at her husband. You know, she grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I think this marriage is going to be my most profitable venture yet. Sebastian kissed her, the sound of the ocean below them, the future stretching out as wide and endless as the horizon. I certainly hope so, Your Grace. I certainly hope so. And so, the Duke didn't just get his Duchess. He got a partner who could bring him to his knees and then help him stand tall again. Sebastian and Evelyn proved that while love is fragile, it is also the only thing strong enough to survive the fires of pride and the cold winters of separation. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but I think Evelyn Thorne proved that the best revenge is simply becoming so powerful that your enemies cease to matter. She didn't just win the man, she won the war. Now, I have a question for you. If you were Evelyn, would you have forgiven Sebastian? Or was his betrayal a year ago too great to overlook? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, click subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a new drama coming next week involving a runaway bride and a ruthless billionaire. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep your standards high and your comebacks sharper.